All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up a blank drawing file, and I think I'll just start with the architectural template. So from my quick access menus here, just on the opening page of Revit, I'm going to click architectural template. Okay, and I think I lied last week because I said we're going to start talking about wall definition, which I think that'll actually happen next week. Okay, but we will use the wall command to draw most of the things we're gonna draw today. Okay, so I want to talk about how to actually use our drawing commands. All right, so we have a few different drawing commands that I'm going to talk about, and I'm really going to emphasize probably 3 or 4 of them. I'll show you the other 5 or 6 that maybe I potentially don't use very much, which is why I'm not going to emphasize them. But drawing commands really, they are what they sound like. When you start your Revit model, your 3D model, these drawing commands allow you the tools to create geometry in your drawing board. So if you were to compare it even to hand drafting, right, this would be your pencil, right, your protractor, your ruler, your eraser, right? That's what your drawing commands are going to be. And I think probably there's really actually 3 that I'm going to focus on. The line tool, the rectangle tool, and then the pick tool. Those are probably 99.9% of the time, those are the drawing tools that I use to create geometry. Although I say that, we will go over these other 4, the fillet, the arc, the circle, and the polygon. Okay. And I'm going to say this, we are going to use these drawing commands without really knowing a whole lot else, right? We don't know about the wall command. We don't know about windows and doors and different things like that, but we can draw them. All right. Okay, so here I am. I'm in my drawing board, and I'm on just our level 1 view of our model right now. And the first thing that I want to say about Revit is that it's a program where a lot of times until you initiate a command, number 1, or select an item, a lot of your options don't pop up, okay? And what that means is I can't really kind of browse through my tabs up here and find my drawing tools, right? You're thinking, well, I have this line tool that I want to use to draw a wall. Well, in AutoCAD, the format usually is if I want to draw a line, I click on the line tool and I draw my line, right? In Revit, the workflow is just a little bit backwards, okay? So options and functionality a lot of times don't, again, show up until you initiate a command or until you start some type of functionality. So I'm going to go back to architecture here. So for example, if I want to use the line command to draw something, first I have to choose what I want to draw. So do I want to draw, and let me just say this, with the line command, things are limited as far as what you can draw. So really I only am going to choose the wall to draw with. But before that will pop up, I have to initiate my wall command. So I can do that by typing WA on the command line, or I can click on the icon here. So click. I've just initiated my wall command. Okay, so I initiate my wall command, and then all of a sudden you notice that my ribbon view changes. A lot of things pop up here. Let me hit escape, and escape will clear me out of that command that I just initiated. Escape, 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 and I'm cleared out of the command. And you see my ribbon, right, looks different than it did before. So I'm going to click on wall. I initiated my command. I could have also typed WA, and all of a sudden my ribbon looks different. Now all of a sudden my drawing tools are presented here. Now I have this modify toolbar that has a lot of different definitions in it. Okay, and those didn't really show up on my screen again until I initiated the command. All right, so we're going to use the line tool here to draw. So I clicked on wall, I came over here to my drawing tool palette, which pops up, and I can click on whatever drawing tool or method I want to use to create my geometry now. So I can click on line, I can click on rectangle, click, and you see it switches. I can click on any one of these, right? And that will be my drawing method for this command, okay? Click. I can also change my mind. If I start with a line and then I think I'm going to use rectangle, I can change my mind, and I can, in the middle of my drawing command, I can click and choose a different drawing method, okay? So I'm going to click on line. I'm going to come down here to my drawing board. I'm going to click. I'm going to move in the direction I want to go. I'm going to click again. Click. Move in the direction I want to go. Click. Move in the direction I want to go. Click. I'm going to hit escape. Escape, escape, escape. Okay. So what I just did there was I used the line tool to draw some walls. So the way the wall command works is that I click to initiate in the drawing space. I move my cursor in the direction I want it to go. I click again. It's as simple as that. That is the line tool. Okay. The way that we just drew that wall wasn't really what I'll call dimensional, meaning we didn't input a dimension to make it. We just clicked. We kind of free-handed it, right? So I clicked on wall. I clicked on line. I clicked on my drawing space, moved in the direction I want to go, and I clicked. And that just kind of created a line of whatever length, all right? Now, if I had wanted to create a wall that was a specific length, as in I was drawing or copying a set of drawings that I'd been given by somebody, right? They'd given me a set of drawings and said, we need you to draw this building shell because we're going to remodel it. So we need you to draw it exactly as it exists on these drawings, and then we're going to change it, right? Which happens frequently in the profession, right? So if I needed to draw something dimensional, I'm going to hit escape here. I'm going to type WA instead of going up to the icon, WA. My command was initiated. It by default remembered that I wanted to use the line. Click, move in the direction I want to go, and I'm going to type in a dimension. All right. Now, I think I've said this before, and this is, again, something a little different than AutoCAD, but the foot is the default unit in Revit. Okay. So if I type in 15 and I hit enter without adding any sort of designation as far as unit, Revit will just guess that I mean 15 feet, right? AutoCAD, if I type in 15 and I hit enter, it will assume 15 inches, all right? So if I wanted to make this 30 feet long, I would just type in 30, enter. And you can see there's that little blue dimension that is popping up that we can see, right? And it tells me now that indeed that line is 30 feet long, okay? If I want to move in this direction and do it, we'll do a 13-foot line. 13, enter, right? And I create a 13-foot line, right? I can move in this direction. You'll notice there's that little blue dimension again. I could type in 10'6" if I wanted to create a 10'6" line, but I can also, Revit is really good about visually allowing me to draw walls using the line tool on screen, right? It allows me to do that. So if I wanted this to be 20 feet, I would just move my cursor until it said 20 feet, and I would click. Okay. All right. So that's using the line tool to create dimensional lines and also to create freehand lines. Well, what happens when I have not in sort of even increment of dimension, not just 20 feet, 20 foot, 6 inches, right? Well, I'm going to come up here to wall, click, move in the direction I want to go, 20 space 6. Okay. Enter, and you get a 20 foot 6 inch line. Okay. Again, in AutoCAD, if you were to hit the enter key, right, in between that 20 and the 6, you'd get a hard return, which would execute the command. So this is something that those of you who use AutoCAD will have to get used to. The idea that if the space bar is not forbidden in Revit, right, it doesn't create a hard return, and in AutoCAD it does. So what if I wanted to do something like 20 foot 6 and 1/2 inch? Well, I space them again. 20 space bar, 6 space bar, 1/2. Okay. So with that input right there, Revit knows that it's 20 foot, 6 inches, and 1/2 of an inch. Enter. Okay. You'll notice me doing something a little bit different, not different, but it's just kind of a habit because I used AutoCAD for so many years. And not only that, but I just think I'm kind of a lazy drafter. I don't like to move my hands around a lot. I like to keep my one hand on the keyboard and the other on my mouse. And I don't like to have to look for keys on my keyboard either, right? And so what you'll see me doing a lot of times for input is I'll do, if I wanted to make this 6 foot, 6.5 inches long, I would type 6 space 6.5. Oops, 6.5. Right? 6.5, but I don't have to type 6 and then find the slash key with my hand on the keyboard and then go back to the, the keypad, right? And type the 2. So that just kind of makes it a little bit easier. I know where all the numeric keypad numbers are and where the period is on the numeric keypad, right? So 6 foot, 6.5, enter. And Revit knows that that's 6 foot, 6.5 inches, okay? If I were just to type 0.5, that would be 6 inches because it would be half a foot, all right? Escape, escape. I'm going to initiate the wall command again. I have one more format that I want to show you, and that is, what if I just want to do 6 inches, right? Click, move in the direction I want to go. 6 inches would be 0 space 6. So you're doing 0 feet, 6 inches. Or if you know the decimal equivalent, right, like we do, you could say 0.5, and that's half a foot, so which is 6 inches. Okay, so 0 space 6, enter, and I get, whoops, a little 6-inch piece of wall right there, right? There's my 6 inches. All right, so one other thing I want to remind you is that as you are creating wall geometry like this, don't forget that you can zoom in, you can zoom out, and you can pan back and forth, right? So I can come up here to wall, click, my line command is initiated by default. I can click, move in the direction I want to go. I can type 20 space 8 inches, enter, zoom in, 20 space 7 inches, enter, right? And I can continue on, and you can see I'm zooming in, I'm zooming out, I'm panning back and forth, and it doesn't break my command, all right? I'm going to hit escape. I also want to remind you that now that I've generated all these garbage walls on my view here, and they're kind of cluttering it up, and I still want to show you a couple of other drawing commands. I want to show you that I can select these items and delete them pretty easily. I can click, delete, click, delete, click, delete, right? I can also hover, tab, click, delete. I can also click, hold my mouse button, drag over the top of those objects, let go, hit delete. I can also click from this bottom left-hand corner, hold my mouse, drag up to the top right, let go, delete. Okay. Double click my middle roller and I zoom extent so that my entire drawing board is now back on the screen. All right. Any questions with the line command so far? Not terrible, right? Okay. All right, let's talk about the rectangle command next. So I'm going to click on my wall command again, and instead of using a line, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to choose rectangle. Click. All right. I'm going to click, click, and I have my rectangle. Okay. The rectangle is kind of it's a simple command. It's a rectangle. Obviously, you can create rectangles and squares. But I'm going to give you a little insight into Revit, kind of workflow in general, some things that you're going to find as you're drafting here. And that is, a lot of times, it sounds, when I say this, it sounds like Revit is a little bit inaccurate, which it's not. It's a very accurate program. It has a lot of integrity. But the workflow is a little different than AutoCAD, right? I was used to drafting in AutoCAD for years and years and years and years. And when you draft in AutoCAD, you draw things the first time the size they should be, right? In Revit, it's a little bit different. Most of the time, not most of the time, but a lot of the time when you're drawing something, the way that I've found the workflow to be is that you draw something and you get it as close to the size you want it to be, and then a lot of times you have to fine tune it and alter it to get it to that exact size you want it to be. Okay, which sounds kind of not the way things should be, but the way that Revit software was sort of created was when they generated the software, it was actually called Revise It, right? And when Autodesk purchased it, they changed the name to Revit. Okay, and the idea was with Revise It that you generated things that were mostly where you needed them to be, and then you revise them to be exactly what you wanted them to be. And you'll see that workflow in drawing, you'll see that workflow in creation of a lot of things and definition of things. So, you know, one thing you're going to notice when we start creating wall types, there's not a new wall type button. When you want to create a new wall type, you don't say new wall type and define it. You take an old wall type, you redefine it, you create a copy, and that's how you create a new wall type. Okay, so you're constantly revising things, and I've sort of just gotten used to it, and it is what it is, right? So my point with that is that when I generate my rectangles here, right, you know, there are a couple of ways, like if I were to enter 15 here, hold on a second. See, I don't even go that way anymore. If I were to generate my rectangle here, okay, yeah, it's not even going to work. Never mind, I'm not even going to go that direction. I get it to be as accurate as possible, but if I can't get it as accurate as possible, I'm going to use other methods after I've drawn my initial rectangle to then perfect it, okay? So here, there's, you know, like in AutoCAD, you type in 15, 27, and you get a 15 foot by 27 foot rectangle, right? Here, I'm going to visually look at this, and I'm going to get it as close as I can to what I want it to be. Click. And then we're going to learn methods probably next week, or no, on Wednesday. On Wednesday on how to modify this to get it exactly the size I want it to be, right? Maybe I didn't want that to be 27 feet. I wanted it to be 30. Okay. Or I didn't want this to be 30 feet. I just wanted it to align with that wall. Okay. So we're going to learn some methods on how to get things perfected. But essentially, with my rectangle command, it's just kind of eyeballing it, right? Click and move in the direction I want to go. Click again, and there's my rectangle. Okay. One thing you may be noticing is that as I'm drawing these things, the dimension is pulled from the center line of wall to center line of wall. I just want you to pay attention to that because it plays a huge role in professionally when you're creating drawings, how you actually define how these walls are generated. Okay, this wall generation where you have these grips at the center line, it's called the location line. It's a wall center line location line, and that means when you're drawing these walls, regardless of whatever drawing tool you use, do you see how I'm drawing from the center point of that wall? Okay. I just want you to be kind of aware of what's happening, as opposed to, I can change this to the finished face. See how now it's on one side or the other, right? Okay, just some things I'm pointing out. We don't need to really do anything with those right now. I just wanted to point out that there are different ways of generating walls, and how you generate them really defines kind of their length, right? Okay, so I created a bunch of rectangles. I want to get rid of these rectangles because we want to move on to the next drawing tool. So I'm going to hover, I'm going to tab, click, delete, hover, tab, click, delete. I can also just select with the window all of that, delete, select, delete. Okay, so we know how to use a line, we know how to use a rectangle. Any questions on any of those so far? Not terrible, right? Let's move on to, I'm going to go over polygon, circle pretty quick. They're fairly easy to generate. And I'm going to leave some geometry on the screen, and then we're going to work on fillet and pick, and those will be our drawing commands for today. You will have a drawing assignment, and so I don't forget, let me just show you real quick where that's at. It's going to be a video assignment, And what I want you to do with it is just copy whatever you see on the video, essentially. So there's a short YouTube video and it will say something, it opens up and it will say, you know, initiate the wall command, click and then draw a 15-foot length wall and then go this direction and do this. So I can't remember how long it is. I think it's 15 minutes essentially. Okay. So you'll just be doing a 15-minute exercise where you follow along with the video. Okay. All right. So polygon and circle, we all know what a polygon is, right? Something like, a triangle or, a pentagon or a hexagon or an octagon, whatever. We have the ability to create those. So if you want to, build a bunch of turrets on the houses that you're drawing, then that will be the tool for you, right? The good old polygon tool. And then we have the circle tool, which will create circles. So those tools are no different than line and rectangle in that they don't appear as an option to draw until you initiate a command. So I'm going to come over here to wall again. Okay, I'm going to click on, here's our polygon, and we have two types of polygons. We have the inscribed polygon, and we have the circumscribed polygon, which means that you generate these, and one polygon generates as if it were being created inside a circle, right? So you can see a little graphic there. The polygon is created inside of a circle. And the second one is as if it were created on the outside of a circle, all right? I'm not entirely positive why we still have these two options, because when you type in, when you create a polygon, you essentially define a center point and a radius, right? So when you do that, you're getting a dimensional polygon regardless of whether or not it's formed inside or outside of a circle, right? So maybe there's something I'm not thinking about with that, but maybe it's when you're freehand drawing, I guess, right? Maybe, I don't know. But my point with this is that we're getting a dimensional polygon however you draw it, so I don't think it really matters which one you use, but there is a difference between the two. So I'm going to click on this first option, and the way that a polygon and the way that a circle both function is you're going to click a midpoint for that polygon or circle. Click. So there's the center, right? The very middle point of my polygon. And you're going to be asked to specify a radius. That's how you draw them. So I could type 20, enter. And I have a 20-foot polygon, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, with 6 sides. And that means that it has a 40-foot diameter, right? 20-foot radius, 40-foot diameter. This one has 6 sides, okay? If I wanted to alter the amount of sides, right, click. And you'll notice that up here, I think I might need to do this before the command starts. Let's see. 8, enter. Oh no, it did it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think it's actually easier if when you initiate the polygon command, you're going to notice here in the modify toolbar, which contains a lot of different options for your drawing tools, you can change that to, 10, okay? And you come down here, you click, and I get a 10-sided polygon, and again, it asks me for a radius. So we'll do 15 foot, enter. Click, and maybe it's 3 foot 6 and 1/2. Enter, right? You guys get the idea. So the syntax of your input, the 3 foot 6.5 is identical to a line, right, or a rectangle. But the way that this is formed is a little different. We have a midpoint and we have a radius. Okay, simple as that. I'm going to initiate the wall command again, and we're going to talk about the circle. Okay, circle forms exactly like a polygon. Click, move in the direction you want to go, which doesn't really matter because it's the same all the way around, right? But I choose a direction and type a radius, 10 foot, enter. Okay. Now, this dimension here that is pulled shows that it's 9'4" to the finished face here, right? Which means that this circle, okay, it's being generated finished face exterior. So when I draw that circle, that dimension that I draw is actually being drawn either to the inside or to the outside, okay? So my radius let me pull a radial dimension here. Don't worry about doing this. There we go. Is actually to the outside. Do you see that? So that, what we call a temporary dimension, that blue dimension was a little deceiving because I did type in 10 feet, but because the wall itself was 8 inches, right, to the inside it shows 9'4". That's why that dimension is showing like that, okay? Some of these things in Revit can get kind of tricky, right? We have to think about things as really defined objects, right? In AutoCAD, I think some of that is not eliminated, but it's not as inherent in the program when you're drawing, right? When you're drawing with AutoCAD, you're drawing lines, and these sort of things don't come up as much as maybe in Revit immediately. All right, so I'm going to go back to my architecture tab here, click on wall, click on my circle, click, move in the direction I want to go, 6 foot, enter, there's my circle. Easy, easy, right? If I want to delete these circles, hover, tab, click, delete. Or I could, again, just use my selection tools that I have available. You see they come in halves, right? Oop, that side is not coming. If I want to add that to the selection set, I would hold Control, click, delete, there they all go. Okay, so we have our line, we have our rectangle, square, we have our polygons, we have our circle. Line and rectangle and circle, fairly easy. There's not a whole lot of other input you need other than your dimensionality. With our polygon, we do need to, before we start drawing, we need to enter the number of sides that we want. All right. I'm going to come back here to wall. I'm going to create a couple of just regular straight line walls, and then I want to show you how the pick drawing command works. All right. So I'm going to click on wall again. And I'm going to click, 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 click. It's just so easy to draw buildings, right? Oop, there we go. And we'll finish it off. There we go. So also what's nice about Revit, those AutoCAD users, right? You're going to notice that when I'm drawing my walls that everything nice and neatly joins at the corners, right? There's no having to fill it or trim or extend heavily. And if you do, it's kind of a different command in Revit because all of these wall lines, because they're 3D geometry, they all very nicely and neatly join together. So there's not a whole lot of cleanup with regard to corners, which hopefully you'll appreciate, right? I appreciate it. All right, so let's talk about the pick command. I use the pick command all the time for so many things, so many things. And what I like about the pick command, I'm going to initiate the wall command here first. What I like about this pick is that it very easily allows me to create dimensionality, right? Where I think that is maybe a weakness in Revit, like I said. A lot of times I'll create things and I'll get them as close as possible, but I always have to go in and revise it, right? Because I'm not sure if the dimension is correct. So I'm pulling a lot of dimensions, I'm double checking things, you know, all things you have to do in a computer-aided drafting program anyway. But what I like about the pick is that I can take, and let me back up, the way that the pick tool works is that it will allow me to create an object, you know, something like a wall, and it will allow me to create that wall a specific distance from another wall. All right, you'll see me using pick all the time, and I'll point out when I use it. But essentially, I can click, okay, and now it says, let me just show you a couple of other things as we're drafting. So I clicked on pick, and I come down here, and we're not really sure quite what to do yet, right? Number one, down here in our kind of shortened command line, if you ever get lost in a command and you don't know what to do next, this says select an edge or line. Okay, so number one, we know we have to select something in order for this command to work, right? So that's true, all right? I have to select something in order for this to work, but there's another definition I have to use before I create my selection, and that is I have to specify an offset, all right? And the offset is how far I want my second object to be formed from my first object. So for example, if I want to take this wall right here and I want to generate a second wall below it that's 10 feet from the first wall, I would come up here to offset and I would type 10, enter. And now as I hover over this wall, do you see I get a blue line happening? That blue line is showing me that, hey, if you click, you will get a second line formed. That second line will be identical to the first in construction, meaning it will be the same wall type, and will be 10 feet from the first line. Click. Click. If I hover on the other side, do you see how it wants to form on the other side, but there's already a wall there, right? Okay. I can also grab the midpoint. So, you know, the definition is really going to be 10 feet from this line, 10 feet from this line, or 10 feet from this line, right? You get to decide. So click, 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 right? And we start to get all of those different copies. Now this will work on a lot of different things. It will work on, number one, any type of geometry. So if I want to use the pick tool to offset a circle, it'll work. A polygon, it will work. A square, it will work, right? Obviously lines, it will definitely work. But not only will it work on wall geometry, it will work on reference planes and detail lines and a lot of other things in Revit. So what I like, number one, about the pick option of drawing is that it's easy, it's dimensional, and it will work on a lot of different items. So I can use it to generate a lot of different things. So I use it a ton in Revit, essentially. Oops. Okay. So the pick tool, if I want to create a wall, I come up here, and again, this is just another way to generate geometry, right? I click on the pick, I give it an offset dimension, and there's really no other place you can specify the offset than here. So 2 foot 6 and 1/4 of an inch. Enter. Click, 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 and I start getting all my little offsets. Okay, I'm panning, but I'm still in my pick, right? So I can continue to zoom, pan, zoom in, click, zoom out, zoom in, click. Okay. All right, so we have our line, we have our rectangle, we have our polygon circle, we have our pick. We're going to do one final, drawing command today, and then some of these other tools that look like they're grouped into the drawing tool palette, we're going to talk about on Wednesday as part of our modification commands, okay? And I always joke about this, but those of you who had me for AutoCAD as well, I hardly ever use this tool because I hate it. My nemesis, the arc, never works, even in AutoCAD, so I tend to stay away from it. But and there's other ways of achieving arcs in the form of, like, maybe I want a line to gently curve an arc from here to here, right? There's another way to achieve that other than using an arc, which I feel is a better option. So I don't ever use the arc. But if you're using, designing buildings or whatever that have long sweeping arcs of glass, then this would be the perfect tool for you. So again, I'm going to initiate the wall command, and here I have my arc. This is a start and radius arc, okay? We have a couple of different options for arc. We have our start and radius, and we have our center arc, all right? So I'm just going to show you the difference between these two. That is wonderful, but I don't really want to, there's another tool for that. See how difficult that looks? Anyway, so to create our arc, I'm with my start end radius. It gives me a definition, how you're going to draw it. Create the start point, the end point, and then the radius, right? Okay, here's my start point, click. Here's my end point, click. Now I need to specify a radius. It's not really wanting to work the way I want. See, what's that?
You clicked the other one.
What other? Oh, did I click something else?
Yeah, you clicked the center point.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're right. Start. Oh no, start and did I click that one? You're right, I did. See, it knows that I don't like it. I clicked the wrong one. Anyway, let's start with, so I'm gonna click and I'm gonna hit delete and we'll start that again. Oop, So here's my start and radius. There we go. Here's my start, click. There's my end, click. And there's my, it's going to ask me for a radius. So I can type something in. We'll do 8 foot, enter. And there's my arc, right? What I somewhat don't also like about this, other than I don't like drawing it, is that some of these objects, like from here to here, you know, sort of figuring out the radius between that is somewhat of a guessing game, right? Revit will help you sort of estimate it, but anyway, I shouldn't say I don't like it so much, right? But start, end, and there's radius, right? So if you had a building and you were creating this long, wonderful, sweeping glass facade, there you go, okay? And then we have the second one, which I feel like is even more difficult to generate, which is the center ends arc, right? So this one really relies kind of on object snaps, and it wants you to specify the center of the circle the arc is based upon, and then draw the other points. So here's the center of my arc, click, click, click. It kind of goes opposite of what you'd think, right? So you're specifying the center here of this. If this were a circle, right, then you're specifying the center of the circle, and then point 1 and point 2, okay? So this is probably a little bit more of a tool to be used if I could approximate the center of maybe where these two objects come together, which is not happening. I'm trying to get a little, anyway, you guys get the idea. There's the center. There's one end. Oh, there's the other end. Okay. I don't think I've ever used this in professional practice, ever. Just doesn't work for me. I use what's called a fillet, and that will allow me to get those nice, beautiful arcs that make sense. So we have line, we have rectangle, we have polygon, circle, we have arc, and we have the pick. Okay, and really, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 6 drawing commands, right? And you'll be able to create really any type of geometry that you want in Revit with that. So there's going to be some things that get a little bit advanced, and I'll show you how to deal with those, but it's really down to those simple drawing commands, right? And I just want to remind you that if I pop into 3D right now, right, my 3D is right here. Everything that I drew is in 3D. It's like a corn maze, right? Okay. All right, any questions about any of those things so far? All right. So let's go over some of the stuff, we'll call it stuff, that pops up as I draw, right? These blue dimensions, let's talk about those. Let's talk about things like these little pink symbols that pop up as I draw, right? So we're going to talk about what are called drawing aids, essentially. So we're going to talk about object snaps. We're going to talk about temporary dimensions. I'm going to talk about the location line and how you can redefine that. And we're also going to talk about reference planes today. All right. So the first thing I want to point out is I want to talk about temporary dimensions. I'm going to delete a couple of, well, I'm going to leave that. We'll delete a few of these things. I'm just use my selection and delete. Selection window, delete. Selection window, delete. Okay, sorry guys, I need to remember to do something here real quick. Let me. Okay, I'm gonna remember to do that in a second. All right, so I'm just gonna delete a few things here so that it's not so cluttery. There we go. I don't really like that point there, so I'm going to go to wall. Well, we'll leave that alone. Okay, anyway. So I have kind of this basic geometry happening on my screen. Let's talk about temporary dimensions. So as you're drawing using any type of drawing tool that you want, whether it's a circle or a square or anything, as you draw, you're going to notice that when I click, I move in the direction I want to go, I get some blue type stuff happening, right? Blue annotation happening on my screen. And when I say annotation, what I mean by that is annotation is descriptive text or dimensions that happens on drawings, right? To help you describe those items. So for example, that dimension is describing a 14-foot 6 dimension on that line I have drawn, right? And that blue dashed line, that is defining the fact that this has a location line on the finished face exterior, okay? So it's telling me, number one, how the wall is being drawn, and it's telling me its length. If I move my cursor down a little bit, I will also get an angle, all right? So you see some of this in AutoCAD more so than you used to. So I don't think it's really that new of an idea. Anyway, but it's going to be, I think it's Revit's sort of way of trying to help you draw more accurately, and it makes it more visual for you, right? Which is always helpful. There's not really, well, I'm not going to say that, never mind. So temporary dimensions, as I'm drawing, you see that they are very dynamic, right? They change with my cursor movement, essentially. So what's nice about this is that if I don't want to type in a dimension, I can get my cursor to be pretty accurate with them. 9'6", there we go, click. Now I move this direction, 2'4", click. Right? So I don't really have to even be typing anything in to get accurate geometry, which is really pretty nice, right? I'm going to click again, and I'm going to hit escape. Okay, so those blue temporary dimensions, as you're drawing, they help you visualize how big things are, which is really nice because it sort of gives you a sense of scale of what your drawing space looks like, which is difficult when you have, like in Revit and AutoCAD, you have these drawing boards that can be infinite in scale, right? They can be 10 miles long or they can be 10 inches long, right? And you have no sense of scale, right? When my drawing board has no walls on it, it could be, 4,000 acres, or it could be half an inch square, okay? So those sort of give you a sense of scale, and they help you draw things. Now, those temporary dimensions, they're blue when you first start drawing, and they remain blue when they're temporary. So as you're drawing, they're blue, they're temporary, which means that when I hit escape or I move to another piece of geometry, they disappear, which is great, okay? But the nice thing about them is that if I, for example, click on an object after I've drawn it, they reappear. And there's two things that these temporary dimensions can do for you. Number one, if I click on it, on the text of the temporary dimension, where it says 9'2", it highlights and it indicates that I can edit it, right? So I could type in 10'6", enter, and that line lengthened. So now it went from whatever it was, 9'2" or whatever, to 10'6". Okay, those temporary dimensions, they don't show up until you select the object they're associated with, right? So I said this when we started the lecture, but some options don't pop up until you select an object or you initiate a command. And this is one of those things. So as you're drawing, they show up, right? But if you hit escape, they're not there. If you hover, they're not there. Until you click on something or drawing something, they don't show up. So I click on that, my blue dimension pops up, click, 20 foot, enter, and it lengthens on this end here. Sometimes, this is a good thought here, I can define one way that these temporary dimensions choose how to lengthen or shorten in a different instance, which I'll show you. In this case, I'm just going to say this because I'm kind of guessing, but it appears as if it takes the edge that is unconnected and lengthens it that direction, because that makes sense, right? Because if you lengthened it this direction, right, it would just kind of create a wall that doesn't make sense. It would extend beyond kind of a connection point. And so I'm going to hit undo, Control Z. So it's lengthening it in this direction. I bet it will do the same thing down here, right? So 4'6", if I click and I type 10 foot, enter, it lengthens it at its free end, okay? So temporary dimensions, they allow you a visual connection when you're drawing. They allow you to alter the geometry after you've drawn it. And then the third thing that these temporary dimensions can do is they can become real dimensions, okay? So if I click on my object, my temporary dimension pops up. There's this little symbol below the text, and it says, make this temporary dimension permanent. And if I click on that, okay, it turns it black, like text. So now I have a permanent dimension. So if I'm drawing something and somebody says, hey, can you just throw a quick dimension on that, right? Sure. I can click here, click on make that permanent, hit escape, and that pops up. Now it's covering my wall. I can click on my dimension and pull it down just a little. This is not a typical dimensioning type workflow. It's not like when I'm dimensioning a building, this is what I do, right? I have actual dimensions that I can use, a tool, right, and annotate, and I have all these dimensions that I can actually use, okay? But it is a good way to make some quick, quick dimensions if I need them, essentially. So that is going to be our first drawing aid, is our temporary dimensions, and they pop up everywhere, right? When I first started using Revit, I was like, oh, these are great. I love these temporary dimensions. They help me visualize. They help me draw things without having to type stuff in. They are wonderful. And then as I started using them more, I started thinking they're everywhere, and I can't differentiate one from another. You get to a point where there's so many popping up everywhere that it's almost like they are not functional for you sometimes. But in general, they're pretty okay. Now, this little piece of wall has a temporary dimension down here, and it also has an angle here. I can click on the angle, 150, enter, right? And it changes the angle. So it doesn't matter what type of dimension you have, 2 foot, enter, you can still engage it and change it, okay? All right. Any questions on temporary dimensions? The next thing that I indicated a little bit as a drawing aid is going to be the location line of the object we're drawing. So as we're drawing something like a wall, click, that blue dash line indicates the location line of the object we're drawing, all right? And it seems kind of small in this context, but it's actually a pretty big deal. Because walls in Revit have thicknesses, right? And let's just say your client has given you a physical restraint with their building, cannot be any larger than 10 by 10, right? If you draw your building, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to draw it from, I'm going to draw my building from the finished face of the interior. You're going along drawing, okay, 10 foot, enter, right? And I come up here, 10 foot, enter, and I come over here and I type 10 foot, enter, and then I close it up. That's all well and fine, right? Except that it's really not 10 feet, right? That building that you drew with a location line to the exterior is actually 10 foot 8, right? So you really want to pay attention to how you are drawing your walls, how the wall location line is defined, because it can really add a lot of square footage to a project or shrink a lot of square footage out of it, okay? The location line is also important because, let me do finish face exterior, okay? Because if this is my exterior location line and I need to change the assembly of a wall, which we'll get into a lot later in the semester, I take it from an 8-inch wall to I don't know how thick that is, right? But we'll change this wall type that's existing to this thicker wall type. Do you see how it took that wall type and it absorbed the thickness to the interior, right? Which if I had my location line on the, we'll just say the opposite side, it would have grown out instead of growing in, okay? I'd like to make this kind of hopefully blatantly make you aware of it, right? Because this is a huge deal when you're a beginning drafter and you go into a project, into an office and you're working. If you're not paying attention to your location lines, it can really kind of mess a project up, okay? So pay attention to how you're drawing things. And not only, when you're drawing things, but also when you're changing things, you just want to make sure, oh, that location line's to the interior. Well, you can very easily, after the fact, change it to the exterior. It doesn't alter anything. But then that definition is to the exterior, so if you need to change the wall assembly, it's appropriate. Okay. So that's your second drawing aid. So we have temporary dimensions that can turn into permanent dimensions. We have our location line. We just have to pay attention to that, right? You can easily change the location line after you've drawn something, which is helpful without, we'll say, damaging it, right? And I say that because I know when I was first drafting, I didn't want to change anything because I was afraid I was going to break it or something was going to go wrong with it, right? But Revit's really great because the program is defined around the idea, you revise things, it's really easy to redefine them after you've drawn them, okay? So don't worry about breaking or, doing something wrong. If you create something and need to change it, Revit is very accommodating with that, okay? All right, temporary dimensions. We have our wall location line. Let's see, let me make sure that I'm not forgetting anything here. Oh, let's talk about object snaps, okay? So these two things we've just talked about are called drawing aids. You'll hear me talk about those all the time. Let's talk about object snaps in Revit, all right? Again, sorry, I talk about AutoCAD all the time, but again, if you've used AutoCAD, object snaps are just inherent. They are things that help you draw things on other geometries very accurately, okay? I think that actually in AutoCAD, AutoCAD sort of wins with the object snap topic. I think Revit, they're a little bit clunky. Hopefully the drafting workflow will get a little better. But I'm going to initiate my wall command here, and let me show you a few of what we call object snaps, okay? So if I want to draw a wall and I want it to, let's choose this as wall center line. I want it to bisect this wall right here, meaning I want it to be drawn right from the center. If I approach the center line, you see how the second that I get to the midpoint of that line, I get a little pink triangle. That little pink triangle means midpoint. And if I click right now, click, that second wall that I want to draw will be drawn exactly at the center point of the first line. Okay, click, escape. Okay, that's essentially what an object snap will do. It will let you choose specific points on other geometry to draw from. So the most common ones, let me show you, well, hold on a second. We have midpoint, right? Midpoint of that line. Now because this wall is, oh no, it didn't do the midpoint there. It's not broken, never mind. We have a midpoint there. We have a midpoint there. We have a midpoint there, right? So Revit will calculate the midpoint on really any object, any shape, okay? So the little triangle, the pink triangle is a midpoint. We also have endpoint, it's a little square. So if I click right there, it's going to draw right from the endpoint of that original square. Okay, midpoint, endpoint, nearest. Nearest is a little X, that's our nearest. That just means that you are on a point on the line, the wall, I guess I should say the wall, right? You're not just out in outer space, you are actually touching that object, and if I click, the second object I draw will grow from that. Okay. We have extension, which you're kind of seeing happen a lot. You see that blue extension line? That's, let's click here. I'm going to move out in this direction. You see how it sort of connects with the fact that, hey, if you click right now, you will be in line with that wall below, right? Well, it wouldn't be the TB building if somebody wasn't drilling in the floor out there, huh? So it's a little confusing because that dashed line currently that we see, that's the location line. But as I move towards the edge of that wall below, I get an extension, okay? And that extension is the object snap. So midpoint, we have endpoint, we have nearest, we have extension. Those I think are the four that are most common. So if I click, those two line up. Click. Oh, see, it's trying to extend to whatever it can. Click. Look at all those temporary dimensions. There's a good example. See, it kind of clutters up your screen sometimes, but click again, endpoint, and things are working, okay? So those, I think we have 4, maybe 5 object snaps running. If you wanted to choose another object snap that is not available, as you were drawing, so I'm drawing, I can right click, and I get a snap override menu. and you can see all the snaps we have. So intersection, we'll choose the intersection between two objects. Endpoint, midpoint, we know what those are. Center, we'll pick like the center of a circle or a polygon to draw from. Oh shoot, my computer's gonna restart. Are you guys getting that error? 14 minutes, we have 14 minutes. Okay, I'm getting an automatic update here. Yeah, 14 minutes, okay. Center, nearest, we know near its quadrant. That means on a circle, if you want to get the top, bottom, or left or right quadrant. We're not going to worry about points. We're also not going to worry about work plane grid. Perpendicular, that allows you to draw, I think perpendicular is on. Perpendicular, there's our perpendicular. No, that's the vertical. Let me write, oh, do you see that little one, parallel? Right? So if I click, the second line will be parallel to the first. I get a vertical, which gives me essentially a perpendicular snap. But if I right click, snap override, perpendicular, that little kind of T-squarish looking symbol, that's perpendicular. If I right click, snap override, let's choose, we don't have any of these other ones. We'll choose, I'm not going to worry about any of these below perpendicular or points. Endpoint. There I get my endpoint. Okay. So those are some more drawing aids. They pop up as you need them. If there's a specific one you're looking for, then you can right click and choose it. Let me draw a circle real quick just so you can see the midpoint and the tangents, or the quadrant, sorry. There's my midpoint right there, or center point, sorry, center point. Shows the center point of the circle, click, and there's my endpoint. Right click, snap, quadrant. That's what our quadrant looks like, essentially. There you go. Okay. So this will help you draw pretty accurately, right? So between your temporary dimensions, your location line, and all your object snaps, Revit makes it very easy to draw pretty accurate geometry, right? Although I say that and I revise a lot of things, but I know that I have to revise it because I drew it accurately in the first place. Okay. Does the idea of object snaps make sense to everybody? How they help you? Okay. All right. So let's see, temporary dimensions. One final thing we're going to talk about today is reference planes. And so I'm just going to maybe hopefully clarify something here. We've kind of learned about the Revit interface, right? We know where all the buttons are. We know how the system works. We've now talked about how to navigate, so we know how to navigate around. We know how to use the drawing tools. So we're getting some skills that are going to, you know, like next week, help us really create some good drawings, some good drawings that have integrity in them. I think what I usually like to do once I get you to the point where you know how to define a wall, usually I'll draft a little bit on screen, right? I'll just let you watch me so that you can see how all of these things kind of come together and how they can function together to draw something specific like a building, right? So if things are kind of swimming around your head and it seems a little complicated and you don't quite know how to bring everything together to create something, I think you're probably in a good spot because I doubt anybody knows right now. But in the next, I think, week or so, I think more of it will become clear. Okay, so let me just reassure you of that. And we'll talk about our last topic today before my computer restarts, and that is going to be reference planes. Okay. Revit has a built-in function called reference planes. And reference planes, if you want to give them another name that would maybe be a little bit more descriptive, you can call them construction lines, right? So it's something that you can place on your drawing board that will allow you to visualize something, but doesn't actually, it's not an actual object. It's just a reference, okay? It's a reference plane. So these reference planes, they're green, they're a dashed line weight, they don't print. They're just there to help you draw geometry, essentially, okay? So I say this a lot in AutoCAD. I say the way that you, when you're drawing, you know, sometimes you have to create extra geometry to draw geometry, right? Meaning sometimes I have to offset one line 10 feet to draw a perpendicular line that bisects it, you know, and I know that that length is 10 feet. And then you have to delete what you don't need. But in Revit, they've come up with a system of reference planes to help you do that without having to delete them when you're done with them. We have 10 minutes. We can get done in 10 minutes, right? All right, so if I go to architecture and I go all the way down here, reference plane, I never click on this. I always type RP, okay? RP, click, click, that's a reference plane, okay? So essentially, the way that I use this, in this example I'm going to give you, it might seem repetitive. You're like, why would you do that? That seems like a waste of time. But when we get into some more complicated Revit type functions, it will make sense, right? But if I wanted to create a second wall over here, that is 10 feet from the first wall. Okay, I can, and don't worry about what I'm just dimensioning. We don't know how to dimension yet. But I could say, well, I have a wall here. I want a second wall here at 10 feet off. And you're like, well, we could have just used the wall command in the pick tool. Yes, we could have, right? Like I said, this example doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it will. This is kind of the workflow that you'll use for other things like doors. I want to create a door 10 feet from a wall. Well, we can use reference planes to lay that out, right? I want a window 10 feet off the door. Well, I can use reference planes to lay that out. I want my structural grid to be 10 foot on center. Well, I can use reference planes to lay that out or to match things or to align things, okay? So although this one may not make sense, it's kind of what I would use this for, but maybe in a different application, different example. So I could now come up to wall. I could use my drawing tool, and I could use this reference plane to draw a second wall. Okay. Again, these reference planes, they're what's called temporary geometry. So if I print, they don't show up, right? If I click on it and I hit delete, it's not a 3D object. It doesn't show up in 3D. You know, they're just kind of throwaway geometry that help you create something, and you can either leave it there because you don't need it, or you can delete it because you don't like seeing it on the screen. Okay? But essentially, reference planes help you construct different geometries within your drawing board here. Okay? I'm going to type RP. One really nice thing about reference planes, and this is kind of the general rule in most of the offices that I've worked in, is that if it has a name, see how it says click to name? I could say something like stair landing datum, right? Because that's how I figured out where to draw the stairs or whatever. I outlined the stairs using my reference planes. If it has a name, you're not allowed to delete it, right? Because somebody's using it for some other type of measurement. But if it's just a random floating reference plane with no name, they're free game, right? Office rules. Okay. So we're going to use these reference planes, and we are going to use them to help us create or lay out things to help us generate geometry, essentially. All right. Any questions so far? Yep.
With the reference planes, can you offset them just like you did with the walls?
Yes, absolutely. So like if I'm trying to visualize a structural grid and I do RP, right? And I'm like, oh, I think that it probably needs to be about 10 feet. I can type RP and I can choose a pick, right? Because I can draw them with a line or a pick, and I could offset it like 15 foot, enter, and I could just start saying, well, yeah, that looks like it'd work pretty well. That aligns with, you know, this or that. So I can, absolutely. Yep. All right, any other questions about anything so far? Don't worry, it'll all come together, right? Okay, so you do have an assignment. Like I said, next time we meet, we'll talk about modification commands, right? So we have a basic understanding of how we can create geometry. Well, now how do we copy it? How do we rotate it? How do we move it, right? How do we scale it or mirror it or flip it or do other things, right? So we're going to talk about modification commands, and then we're going to talk about levels, right? Which levels are really kind of what differentiates like Revit from AutoCAD, okay? They create that vertical nature within our model. So we'll talk about those two things. I'm going to go to modules here. We're in module 3 this week. Or today, yeah, this whole week, I guess, actually. Module 3, and you have a video assignment. It takes 15 minutes, and you're just going to follow along, and it's pretty clear. And that is due February 3rd. Thank goodness we're in February almost. That's due Sunday night. Okay. Any questions? All right. We'll end our video then.